Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah from the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canal Center. And as part of our Museum Week celebrations, I am broadcasting live on YouTube from our collections storage in the basement, very deep parts of the St. Catharines Museum today to bring you part 2 of our collections tour, a tour of our collection spaces. Adrian was on this morning to give you a tour of our archival storage. And behind these very bland doors is our next stop on the tour. So let's give it a little go. I'm going to take you along for the ride. These doors, by the way, I should mention, are very thick fire doors. We are very lucky to be part of a purpose-built facility and then have these doors to take care of our collection. So the big reveal is upon us. Our collections B storage room, otherwise known as Big Stuff. I'll give you guys a little glimpse here. Big Stuff here. I'll give a plan of the whole room, nice and slow. Lots to look at. Now, like I mentioned, we are lucky to be part of a purpose-built facility. So this room has very tall ceilings to store some of the larger items in our collection. When we talk about big stuff, a lot of household items like dressers and couches, also some of our more industrial objects from old factories and manufacturing plants in the city can also be found here. So just to give a little pan, we have lots of dressers. If you can see in the back there, we have this big giant red wheel, 2 wheels. That is actually connected to the steam fire pumper that is on display at the St. Catharines Museum. If you've ever been here, that large fire pumper needed a whole other contraption for the hose attached to fight the fire. And this very large wheel wagon was to house that hose. So here, I'll give you here, that's a good view right there. So here at in our collections B storage, we store these large objects that just by looking at them look pretty ordinary. I mean, we all have old dressers. I'm sure we've thrown out an old dresser to make way for a new one that's more stylish or something like that. But these objects, these large objects, actually tell us a lot about how people would have lived and a certain moment in time, a certain era in time. And these would have been considered, how can we look at carpentry or designs at the time, what they would have stored, what kind of function they had in their homes. These are the stories that are attached to these objects. And of course, what we love about artifacts are the stories connected to them, those intangible stories and meanings and values that people place within them. And these large objects I find so fascinating because we might have some of those in our home. So just walking us through here very slowly, we get a sense of some of the objects in our history that can tell us the story of the community. We have a large bellows there that would have come from some sort of manufacturing facility in the city. And then kind of hidden away here is this yellow object. It's large, it's caged. Just by looking at it, we're not really sure what it is. But again, this ordinary, odd-looking object has a really quite a fascinating story connected to it. This is an air raid siren that would have been stationed along the Welland Canal during the Cold War era. Because of the significant importance of the Welland Canal as a trade route, an international trade route between not just Canada and the US, but a global trade route, the Welland Canal was considered a threat, something that might have been under threat during the Cold War era. And these sirens would have been stationed along the canal for a preparation in case of an attack on the Welland Canal. So this tells a story that seems so far away, yet seeing this object in person reminds us that this was a 20th century history. This was 60, 70 years ago that something like this would have been used in our community. And again, what I love about these objects is they're just sitting here in storage, waiting for someone to tell their story. So to take you a little bit further along into our collection space, you notice that our shelves are rolling shelves to maximize storage. These artifacts you see above are couches or sofas. Oh, it's a little crooked there. Couches or sofas that are covered in a non-bleached and unbleached organic cotton. And this is to protect the textiles that these early pieces of furniture are made out of. We are all about preservation here at the museum. Museums preserve artifacts as they come to us. We are not in the business of conservation or fixing, restoring objects, but rather preserving them for future generations. When an object comes to us with scratches, or maybe there's a tear or a rip in these couches, that in itself is part of this object's story. And we want to preserve that. So in future generations, we can talk about how these couches were made, and maybe the fact that they are of a fragile material. They do, suffer rips and tears because these are well-used objects. Again, a lot of the stuff in our big stuff collection storage are home and domestic and something that we might have in our own homes and we can relate to. So you'll see that these are specially formatted shelving units. And the rolling shelves that you see here are to maximize storage. So if I were to roll this one way or the other, it moves and creates more space and more storage for all of our stuff. I particularly like this shelf. I'll give you a few moments if you can identify what these objects are. These are early ice boxes or refrigerators. An ice box, you would have actually gotten a large block of ice and put it at the bottom or the top of this kind of refrigerator to keep your goods cold and refrigerated, and you'd be able to use for longer. So these are early refrigerators that, again, we have, this we understand what a refrigerator is. We see that it's this ordinary object in our own homes, and yet these early objects can tell us about that technology, about these early appliances, about what it was like to cook and have food in a kitchen at a certain moment in time. These ice boxes would have been from, the wooden one is about the late 19th century, and then we see this metal ice box here that would have been the early 20th century. So we can see how over time these objects evolve and become closer to what we understand as a refrigerator today. Now, just to take you a little bit down one of these long aisles, just give you a sense here of what's being stored here. we have a lot of desks of different types of wood. In the back, we have some cabinetry. We store things in museums based on their material as well as their use. So we try and organize objects in the collection storage based on material and or use. That keeps, by keeping like materials together, it's the idea that if we keep like materials together, that the materials won't off gas or counteract each other, and we can keep them safer for longer. You'll also notice that these large artifacts are on black pallet boards, and because they're so large and so heavy, and we need to store them on top of the shelving units here to increase storage and protection. We even have these lifting mechanisms to help us lift these very heavy objects off of their shelves when we use them in exhibits. So I wanted to return to the idea of keeping objects like materials together. This prevents something called off-gassing. Off-gassing is different chemicals, when organic material like wood, when it degrades over time, it could off-gas and release different particles, chemicals into the atmosphere. And this can counteract and impact another object as it's within that kind of close range. So if we keep artifacts together of like materials, this kind of reduces that risk, that harm. As I mentioned before, we are about preservation here, and part of that preservation is protecting artifacts from outside threats to these objects. And those could be not just off-gassing of materials, but even things like humidity, temperature, lighting. This is all controlled in our collection storage. As a purpose-built facility, we have lights that are very dim, that we only turn on when someone is in the room. Otherwise, that UV light over time can fade an object or could deteriorate a little bit more quickly. The same goes with temperature and humidity. Our collection storage is stored at a very specific, about 21 degrees-ish Celsius temperature-wise. Humidity is also very stable, and they don't move up or down. It doesn't matter how hot or how cold it is outside in the environment. In the museum, we spend a lot on air conditioning, a lot on our heating to keep temperature and humidity very stable in the museum, because too hot of a temperature, too cold of a temperature will deteriorate the very fragile materials that our objects are made out of. You might be familiar with this. Perhaps, you have an old piece of furniture in your home or in your parents' home, and this is maybe the wood is brittle or the fabric is brittle and rips quite easily. This might have to do with the environment that it's in. So we keep things here in a very stable environment. In our big stuff storage, we're here to keep things nice and safe and to tell stories about, again, what it was like to live in a home at a certain moment in time. Perhaps, an icebox or this desk, if you can see that, it would have been part of a room where it witnessed a lot of life, a lot of family life happening. Who knows what kind of decisions would have been made at this desk right here. But those are the stories that we're looking to preserve when we keep these objects in the museum collection. So this was my tour of our big stuff storage room. Thank you so much for joining me again. My name is Sarah, here for Museum Week to take you on a behind the scenes look at our collection storage. Please join us again today at 3 p.m. as Adrian will be back to take us through our third and final storage room where he'll look at textiles, artwork, and some of our catch-all artifacts in the museum collection. That's it for me, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.